Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Chorus One Podcast. Today we have a very cool episode with David. He's the founder of Babylon, which is a very exciting project by which I've heard many different definitions, but essentially I think the main one is that it's a Bitcoin staking protocol. I've also heard other definitions like a timestamping aggregation network, and of course, Bitcoin restaking project. Would love welcome David first of all, and would love to hear a bit about yourself and your background and how did you end up developing such an exciting project.
Hey, Lewis, great to be here, and hey, thanks for all the support you've given to our project.
For sure.
Validating for our network, testnet.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Yeah, maybe I guess could we hear a bit about yourself and the idea behind Babylon to start with for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. So just a little bit on my background. So I entered the crypto space about 5 years ago. And before that, I was a researcher and a professor doing research in wireless communication. So, how to make the cell phones work. Now that they all work, supposedly. I decided 5 years ago, I decided to move on to a new topic. And someone showed me the Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper. It was a 9-page paper, but I thought it was like earth-shattering research. So from a researcher point of view, it contains so many new ideas and opened up so many new possibilities that I decided to start an entirely new research group at Stanford University, where I am a professor, focusing on dedicating on blockchain consensus protocol research. In fact, our group is the only group at Stanford, only research group at Stanford, which focuses exclusively on blockchain research. And so we start off with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is like our first love. But then we realized that there are a lot of interest on proof of stake networks at that time, 5 years ago. This was before the merge.
Yeah.
And so we shifted gear and we started doing a lot of proof of stake research. And in the process, we actually found some attack vectors on the Ethereum proof of stake protocol called GASPA, which was published on a paper by Vitalik in about 2020 timeframe during COVID, actually, about a year before the merge. And we found some attacks. And so we started collaborating with Vitalik and his team at the Ethereum Foundation to make certain improvements on the protocol before the merge. And so that's how we got into a deep understanding of the proof of stake economy, so to speak, the proof of stake technology. And so the Babylon project is a startup project that I started with my co-founder, Fisher, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now. And the idea is basically combining our first love, which is Bitcoin, and this entire new economy, new technology called proof of stake. And the idea is really to take the security of Bitcoin from all this proof of work miner and how to leverage that security and complement it with proof of stake technology to build something even better, more secure, etc. And so that's the genesis of the project. And so this is the theme of the project. Under this general theme, we have worked on multiple protocols. So you mentioned in the very beginning of the podcast about people understood Babylon in different ways. Some things Bitcoin staking, some things timestamping. But these are all basic protocols that we have built that focuses on this same theme, which is leveraging of Bitcoin security to help with the proof of stake world. And the latest protocol we built is Bitcoin staking. And that's the one we're building right now. And that's the one we're most excited about.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic overview. And I think maybe we could start there by the last protocol that you mentioned. I think it would be very valuable for the users to hear your definition on Babylon and restaking and staking essentially, and how does it work, how it functions, maybe on a high level, I think it would be great to go a bit deeper here.
Yeah, sure. So if you think about Ethereum, so let's start with the Ethereum history, right? Ethereum started with proof of work. And then about 2 years ago, the merge happened. When the merge happened, there's something interesting that is happening to the entire tokenomics of Ethereum. So it's not just a security issue, it's also a tokenomics issue, because the token ETH suddenly has a native new use case, which it did not have before, which is staking. And so this is kind of stimulate this whole staking industry because of this new use case. Now, Bitcoin, however, remains to be proof of work. It did not change to proof of stake, and it will probably never change to proof of stake, or at least anytime soon. Okay? So therefore, the Bitcoin asset, compared to the Ethereum asset, has sort of one less but very important use case, which is staking. And in fact, not only Ethereum, but most crypto assets, Solana, Avalanche, S2E8, Aptos, they all have this use case of staking. And Bitcoin doesn't have this use case. And in fact, Bitcoin asset as a whole, in general, has almost no use cases. So when you ask anyone who holds a lot of Bitcoin, and you ask them, hey, what are you doing with the Bitcoin? The inevitable answer we get is, oh, the Bitcoin is just sitting in my wallet, doing nothing, waiting for the Bitcoin price to continue going up. But there's no, yield bearing, no use cases. And so the idea of Bitcoin staking is really to give Bitcoin this staking functionality, not for itself, because the Bitcoin chain is proof of work, but to be used as a universal asset, staking asset, that can be used for anybody to build any proof of stake system. So that's kind of the vision of the project. So in some sense, we're combining two things. So, Chorus One is, of course, a very key member, very core part of this staking industry. And so in some sense, what we're saying is that, hey, we have this huge and growing staking industry. We have this huge asset, 1.3 trillion. They have no way of accessing the staking market earlier, and our protocol connects the two together and makes this $1.3 trillion stakeable. So that's the basic idea.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic explanation. I actually have here your white paper, which I remember reading, and the title is Unlocking 21 Million Bitcoins to Secure the Proof of Stake Economy. I wanted to dive a bit deeper on the term security sharing that you use quite often in the white paper, which I think now has maybe rebranded a bit to restaking. And if you could explain a bit further if some things have changed since the white paper, and how do you see this whole ecosystem as a whole? I think that would be pretty interesting to hear.
Yeah. So I would like to sort of clarify a few basic terminology. Staking versus restaking, security sharing. Now, security sharing, let's start with that term, because this is a very old term. In fact, Nakamoto himself, or themselves, or herself, came up with this concept of security sharing in the very beginning of the history of blockchain. In 2010 or 2011, around there, Nakamoto came with this concept called merge mining, which is a way of sharing the security of Bitcoin with other proof of work chains. So miners can simultaneously secure Bitcoin and another chain. So this is merge mining. So if you know of projects called Rootstock, for example, RSK, it is using the merge mining technology even today. Okay. Now, merge mining is useful for sharing security between Bitcoin and a proof of work chain. But nowadays, most of the new chains are proof of stake. So this technology became kind of not so relevant in this new world, proof of stake centric world. And so in some sense, what we're saying is that Bitcoin staking is like security sharing not using the proof of work directly, but using the fruits of the proof of work, which is the Bitcoin asset. Okay, so that is sort of how one can think of Bitcoin staking as in this historical context of security sharing. Now, let's bring in a new terminology now, restaking, which is obviously popularized by Eigenlayer. And Eigenlayer just have the token launched yesterday. And so this is a timely discussion. So restaking is the concept of taking an asset which is already staked and use it for other purposes, right? Use it to secure other, in the terminology of Eigenlayer, AVS, okay? Now, but however, if you think about restaking, the first step, the fundamental step, which is behind restaking, is staking. Yep. You cannot do restaking if there were no staking. And so in some sense, Eigenlayer comes into play only after the merge, only after Ethereum has launched converted the network into a proof of stake network. But Bitcoin has no native staking functionality. So what we are providing in some sense is analogous to the merge for Bitcoin, which is to allow it to have the staking functionality, and then one can build restaking on top of that. So for example, one can consider a system where you stake it or on, say, the Babylon chain, and then you can consider restaking to other chains, other AVS. And so that's how one should think about the relationship between Bitcoin staking and Bitcoin restaking.
Okay.
With Ethereum staking and Eigenlayer restaking. I think that's the sort of analogy.
Yeah, I think that, and that's a fantastic point, and something that I think it's great that we've clarified from the start, because often when I speak about you guys, which I do a lot because I really like the project, many people say, "Oh, it's Bitcoin restaking." Similarly, essentially comparing it to Eigenlayer, but using the Bitcoin asset. And what you have clarified here is that you guys are one step further. You're enabling the Bitcoin staking, which in Ethereum is already enabled, of course, after the merge. And then after that, you could even have some Babylon restaking using the Babylon chain, right? Is that a correct?
Yes. So the restaking is native restaking from Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So in other words, people stake on the Bitcoin on the Babylon chain, but at the same time, they can take on more slashing risk by restaking on other chains as well. So this step is similar conceptually to Eigenlayer restaking. You have taken a slashing risk by staking on ETH, on Ethereum, using your ETH. Now you're going to take on additional slashing risk by restaking on other AVS.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's already super clear, and you guys will have some form of AVS for if in case anyone wants to restake and accept other slashable risk to secure other economic zones, let's say. So yeah, I think that's great that we have clarified. Maybe I think another concept that would be fantastic to go deeper on is timestamping. Often we hear that Babylon is a timestamping aggregation network. So yeah, I would love to ask you, what does this exactly mean?
Yeah. So the word timestamping actually came from Nakamoto's white paper itself, where he said that Bitcoin that he's building, the Bitcoin network, is a timestamping server. So in some sense, what you're doing is you're using proof of work to timestamp transactions so that the arrival time is universally agreed upon. So he calls it a timestamping server. So now you can also use Bitcoin. So the timestamping protocol we have is to use Bitcoin chain to timestamp events that are happening outside the Bitcoin chain. In particular, the generation of proof of stake blocks to timestamp proof of stake block. So that gives Bitcoin, that allows Bitcoin to share security with proof of stake chain. The security, though, is at a slow time scale. In other words, because Bitcoin blocks are generated so slowly, one block every 10 minutes, it takes 1 hour to confirm a transaction. Everything is very slow. So this kind of security is different from Bitcoin staking that we talked about earlier, because staking is like fast finality. This is slow, okay? But slow is useful for some use cases. For example, unbonding is a very important part of staking, because if you don't unbond carefully, then the system can be attacked in the edge case. So unbonding is something that's very important, and you can use Bitcoin security, the timestamping, slow security, to make the unbonding process very secure. And in fact, that was our first product that we built. Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly, this use case of timestamping becomes even more important in the Bitcoin staking protocol. Because in the Bitcoin staking protocol, just like any staking protocol, you still have to unbond. But now it's even more challenging than normal proof of stake network, because the stake is maintained on the Bitcoin chain, whereas the validators are voting on the proof of stake chain. So it's like dislocated. The information whereby you know how much voting power you have is on the Bitcoin chain, and the voting is happening on the proof of stake chain, for example, the Babylon chain. Okay, so timestamping now is important for us to synchronize these two chains, so that when you unbond, we will remove the voting power from the proof of stake chain in time. We, as in the protocol, I guess. The protocol will remove the voting power. And so timestamping plays this role of synchronizing the two chains. So Babylon basically acts as a aggregate timestamping server that allows many proof of stake chains to simultaneously get the Bitcoin timestamp through Babylon. So the Babylon chain provides a timestamping service. The Babylon protocol provides the Bitcoin staking. So that's one way we can think about the various components of the technology. For example, it's like EigenLayer analogy. EigenLayer has the EigenLayer protocol, the entire protocol, to do restaking. Mm-hmm. But it also has an EigenDA, which has a specific usage, which is data availability. So we have a Babylon protocol, which allows Bitcoin staking and restaking. And then we have this Babylon chain, which provides a timestamping service to all the AVS that uses the Bitcoin staking protocol.
So in that analogy, the EigenDA would be the timestamping Babylon chain.
That's right.
And so mechanically, what would the process be like? The Babylon chain sends is it a transaction in the Bitcoin L1 with a hashed representation of the current state of the Babylon chain? Is that correct?
Yes. So the Babylon chain will send a compressed information about the validators. It will be an aggregate signature, in fact, signed by all the validators to signify that that block is certified by the validators and inserted into a transaction in the Bitcoin chain. So Bitcoin chain allows one to insert arbitrary data to be stored on the Bitcoin chain through multiple ways, and we use one of those ways to do that. And once it's in the Bitcoin chain, that means you're saying you're timestamping the time at which this block was certified. This POS block was certified by your validators. So what we're doing for the Babylon chain is essentially have many chains, all of which are timestamping onto Babylon.
Yeah.
And Babylon sends one timestamp that represents all these timestamps. So it's a timestamp aggregator. And because otherwise it costs too much for many chains to each timestamp directly to Bitcoin.
Okay. And this would be with the idea that if there's a problem or a threat, the state could be recreated at a certain point in time to verify its correctness, right?
Yeah, so you can think of yes, but in the context of Bitcoin staking, okay, the purpose of this is basically to give a timestamp to each proof of stake block, so that I know, this proof of stake block corresponds to this time on the Bitcoin chain, and at this time, the stake unbonding has already started. And therefore, at this proof of stake block, I should remove the voting power from the validator. Because, hey, on the Bitcoin chain, you've already started an unbonding process. So I should now quickly remove your voting power so that when you actually unbond, you cannot go and attack the system anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's very interesting and a clear use case. Maybe could you maybe offer a few other use cases for the users to make some relationships?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, so actually the timestamping protocol was built before we invented Bitcoin staking.
Okay.
And the use case there was for a proof of stake chain, native staking, no Bitcoin staking, just native staking, to reduce the unbonding time. Mm-hmm. So we've always focused on this unbonding use case. So in a typical proof of stake chain like a Cosmos chain, okay, the unbonding time is usually 3 to 4 weeks, which is pretty bad, right? Because that means what? That means when you want to remove your fund, in crypto, 3 weeks, many bad things can happen. We should not go into details of what these bad things are, but we all know what we're talking about. And so when we started this research, we thought, hey, how come it takes so long? What's the deal? Why does it take 3 or 4 weeks? And then we realized that basically there is a kind of attack that one can do to this unbonding process called long-range attack. Okay. And so this timestamping actually solved this problem. And we actually did an integration with osmosis that can reduce this unbonding time to like 1 day. Okay. So that was the original use case. And now we're basically combining this use case with Bitcoin staking so that Bitcoin staking can also enjoy this fast unbonding time. But the general use case was this fast unbonding time, which quite a few Cosmos chains like. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember when we first met you guys that was kind of a super cool use case already. And now so many other things are kind of on top as well. So I also want to go deeper a bit on the security and so on that it provides, but maybe kind of I thought that it would be valuable for the users to compare time stamping in Bitcoin versus an L2 verification in Ethereum. Do you think they could be compared at all, or they're very different?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So time stamping is basically an anti-forking mechanism, right? Think about it. Yeah. Suppose someone attacks a L2 or attacks a chain by forking the chain. Now, that usually leads to double spending events, double spending attacks. You can spend a coin multiple times by forking. And time stamping is a way for the clients to say, oh, okay, this fork actually receives the earlier Bitcoin timestamp, and therefore we don't get confused because we'll just follow the fork which has the early timestamp. Okay, so timestamping does not really take into consideration the execution or the transactions. It's really a anti-forking mechanism. Mm-hmm. Now, on the other hand, asset or transaction validation or from an L2 to the main chain like Ethereum is a bridging mechanism. Is a way for the L2 to bridge asset back to Ethereum and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so these two are rather complementary security properties of the system.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point already, and maybe to even go a bit deeper. As you know, there's like a boom in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and there's all of this emerging L2s. So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on that, and also if you have any comparisons to how it looks like versus Ethereum L2. It would be great to know.
Yeah, so I can talk a few things about the L2. One is the use of Bitcoin staking, which we've been talking about, and two is I can also do a comparison with Ethereum L2. First, so an L2 is basically a way of building something on top of Bitcoin, right? And one of the key things you want to do is you want to share the secured Bitcoin. Otherwise, why you call yourself an L2 if you're not even sharing the security of the Bitcoin chain? Because the main reason why you want to build on Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is a very secure system. And you want to be built on a very secure foundation. So again, if you think back at what I said, right, like time stamping, that Bitcoin security is very slow.
Yeah.
But if you want to do an L2 and you want to run a DAX or something, you want very fast confirmation.
Exactly.
So how do you get security from Bitcoin through time stamping alone? You cannot, because it's too slow. And so that's where Bitcoin staking comes in. By transferring Bitcoin asset to stake on these L2 blocks, you can get fast finality. In other words, you don't have to wait till you see the timestamp on Bitcoin chain, which may be 1 hour later, to get confirmation. You can confirm instantaneously. And if the confirmation is reversed later on, then you can be sure that the sequencer can get slashed. So that is the role of Bitcoin staking for L2. And in fact, we're collaborating with multiple projects to build this out. Now, the second question is the relationship or the comparison between Bitcoin L2 and Ethereum L2. Now, obviously, Ethereum L2 is what inspired Bitcoin L2 in the first place. Now, Bitcoin people always think of Ethereum as like a testnet for Bitcoin. And so in that sense, there is a progression of ideas here. However, there's one major difference, and we just relate to what I talked about earlier, which is bridging. So getting security from the main chain is one thing, but bridging asset is another thing, which we'll discuss, right? It's a separate thing. And bridging asset on Ethereum is doable because Ethereum have a smart contract that can verify events that are happening on the L2 blocks and verify for the Ethereum main chain. But Bitcoin doesn't have a smart contract. And so this makes this bridge from the L2 back to Bitcoin. This is called a peg out event.
Yeah.
You're pegging out the Bitcoin asset from the L2 back to Bitcoin. Very challenging. And that's in some sense the core of the problem of designing, in general, Bitcoin use cases. Is this idea of how you can make the Bitcoin chain validate what is happening on the outside in the outside world when Bitcoin is not very smart.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if you go back to our Bitcoin staking protocol, actually we have the same problem because our Bitcoin is staked on the Bitcoin chain, and we want a trustless way of saying that, oh, you've validated does a bad job, like double signing 2 blocks, then that bad event should be transferable back to the Bitcoin chain to slash the Bitcoin sitting on the Bitcoin chain. So this is the Bitcoin staking protocol is one example where we need to verify some event that's happening in the outside world and translate back to something happening on the Bitcoin chain. And this we accomplished over many months of thinking
Yeah.
using cryptography to help us out. But the general bridging problem is a more difficult problem. And that is the one that many people try to solve. There are multiple efforts of trying to solve this problem through different means. But I don't think this problem is solvable in the short-term future. And so I believe that this will take probably 6 to 12 months at least to get to some production quality of a good bridge for Bitcoin.
Okay. Yeah, I think there are many different components that you mentioned that I think are very interesting. First of all, maybe to recap on the main difference is that the Ethereum L1 can use its validators to verify the L2 transactions, where in Bitcoin, however, as you said, Bitcoin is not that smart and it's very hard to do. What I'm understanding now is that Babylon kind of sits in the middle, where you can enable L2s and other projects to actually leverage Bitcoin security through Bitcoin staking and timestamping. But what it's still very hard to do is the bridging of the Bitcoin asset itself, which we've spoken to many different projects. Some have decentralized multisig, some have other form of multisig that is kind of reinforced, but at the end of the day, most look only like a multisig. So yeah, I think that's a very cool explanation.
So the challenge is to how to do it in a trustless fashion without introducing trust on a multi-sig committee.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we accomplished for the Bitcoin staking protocol. But the problem for the bridging, which is bridging general asset transfer, is harder. And how to accomplish that trustlessly is the sort of the grand challenge that is facing the industry.
Yeah. And cool. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. And yeah, I wanted to ask, what do you think about the ecosystem in general and the novel proposals that are being like kind of proposed, like BitVM, for example, to kind of implement a form of fraud proof, or even others like CK trying to use Bitcoin L1 to post the CK proofs. So yeah, just curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, so there are many ideas right now, and there are many proposals right now, and there are many things that people do research right now. So Robert Linus, the inventor of BitVM, is actually our collaborator on the Bitcoin staking protocol. And so I know him very well. And so there are multiple architectures that one can use BitVM. For example, one can actually combine the ZK idea with BitVM. So you can use BitVM to build a ZK verifier for the Bitcoin chain. And the ZK verifier will be able to verify zero knowledge proofs of blocks, of L2 blocks. So this is one architecture, and there are many other architectures that people are considering. So I would say that it is still very active, but research in progress at this moment. And no one knows what's the good architecture. Different architectures have different trust assumptions. Some are stronger than others. Some are permission, some are permissionless, etc. So a lot of interesting but complex research. I would say it's still in the research phase. Definitely not in production phase.
Okay. Yeah, that's very cool and also interesting times ahead. So yeah, I guess we'll see in a few months or years what's the kind of end game for this. But yeah, maybe I wanted to wrap up with security, because of course that's what people ultimately want from Bitcoin. It's the most secure asset in the world. And yeah, just wanted to ask you about the underlying security of a project that combines proof of stake and proof of work. How does it look like, and what's kind of the real security of it?
Well, so Yeah.
Meaning
So
like,
basically, right. So basically, you think about it, right? So in a proof of stake, the security is provided by capital.
yeah,
Now, in a classic proof of stake network, in other words, in the past 5 years, whenever people spin up a new proof of stake network, they typically issue their own token. Okay. Now, and the token always have a good one use case, which is staking. So people use it for that use case, perhaps because of lack of other use cases. Okay. Now, but if you think about it, it's kind of a bad use case for your native token. It's not a very good match. The reason is because security means you want something stable and you want something cheap. Hopefully, you don't have to pay a huge amount for security, because after all, the whole goal to build a new blockchain is not security. Security is a means to an end. You want to do something good with your blockchain, a new application that you want to build.
Yep.
So a native asset is actually both unstable, volatile, and expensive. Why? Why is it expensive? Because of the volatility of the new asset. You need to pay a lot of yield to attract people to stake, to lock up the token, because who knows what happens after 21 days. Your token may be completely worthless. So you got to give a lot of yield. Okay. So therefore, the cost of security is high, the volatility is bad. And so what we're saying is that if you replace it or complement it with the largest asset in the world, and because of the abundance of the supply, also the cheapest potentially in the world, and the most stable crypto asset, then you should consider using that asset to provide security. And so proof of work sort of plays a peripheral role in this discussion, because proof of work is sort of a hidden factor that secure the Bitcoin asset. Of course, if the Bitcoin asset itself is not secure, then this whole thing is kind of a sham, a scam, perhaps. But the whole point is that Bitcoin asset is very secure. That's the premise of the whole project. And so therefore, it could be used as a staking asset, cheap and stable staking asset for proof of stake system. So we're hoping that as the industry grow, right, that native asset will not be used primarily for staking. That people actually have a good purpose for building a network, and therefore a good purpose for their native asset, than just staking.
Yeah. Any ideas of what that could be?
And that, so that's what EigenLayer says, open innovation, right? Is that if you build a strong security base, which is the crux, the heart of decentralization, then the people should be able to build interesting applications where it needs decentralization, maybe decentralized AI, decentralized physical world, DePIN, etc. So that's kind of a little bit sort of outside my job description, I should say.
No, yeah, and I think that totally makes sense. And you also explained before the concepts of long and short range attacks. But what I think you're essentially describing is that the security actually really comes from the proof of work of Bitcoin, and people should use this to secure their proof of stake chains, which have other benefits that we've talked on, like scalability. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to wrap up. I think we're a bit over time. So yeah, just wanted to take the time to thank you again.
Yeah, Louis, so great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for your time, David, and let's definitely keep in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.